What is up, Internet? Welcome to the Outerhaven Spectator Mode podcast. This is episode 175, and we are here to do a special episode of Spectator Mode podcast where we talk all about what we were able to experience with Assassin's Creed Shadows. Today, you have me, and then you have Jordan.
Hello, everybody. I am glad to be here again. I'm glad that I was actually able to be here because there's a funny story that I almost didn't preview this game, and that's actually the reason Scott got to play it in the end. So it worked out well for both of us, I think, and we actually have a lot to say because, we played quite a bit of this game, but I want to start by saying thank you to Ubisoft and the Assassin's Creed team for actually giving us this opportunity to play this game 2 months before release.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, Scott, why don't we start with you? Because you obviously played it first a day before I did.
Yeah.
But I believe we both played around 4 hours, right, in total.
Yeah,
So.
mine was about 3.5 hours. I finished the Noble quest line a little early. I kind of brute forced a few sections, but we could get into that.
Yes.
But I do want to go over. Yeah, yes, we did about 4 hours of consecutive gameplay. We started with about an hour of content we can't talk about because we basically did like the first chapter of the game for both protagonists. That introduced us to them, and we aren't.
But we're not going to tell you anything about it.
Well, we do want to say that we did experience it, and it is a little different than what you're expecting. If you're history buffs of like, if you know about like the Yasuke Nobunaga relationship and how that actually was, things are a little different. But that's all I can tell you.
Yes.
So let's go to what we can actually.
You will be experiencing that in 2 months for yourself, but then we got. After that initial section, which probably took about an hour to maybe 90 minutes, depending on how we chose to play it, we then got taken several hours into the game, I can assume this is, because all of a sudden we were like level 25, 26.
Yeah.
And we had essentially one of the open world regions at our disposal to explore and do a main quest line, and there were also some side quests and side activities in there. But interestingly enough, you could, of course, one of the main things they've been advertising for this game is you could play this quest as either of the playable characters, right? And I think me and you, Scott, ended up doing the same thing where we kind of jumped back and forth as we were playing between the two.
Yes. We had what was known as the Noble quest line, where it has like a whole story arc of the family members of the Yukuta clan, where you basically follow Naue and his son Hirie, which showed a lot of the basically what happened in like the after effects. This is taking place. This is definitely after the Honoji incident because they
mention that
Nobunaga's dead.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, they do mention that. So that we can assume is something that happens either towards the start of the game or whatever. We don't actually know
because where or when Honoji happens, but it does happen in the game.
Yeah. So. For me, I'll start with how I kind of started. I actually started this quest line playing as Naue. I don't know if you did, Scott.
I actually did too.
Because there was one thing that I immediately loved about Naue's gameplay, and that is the parkour. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of parkour.
She actually feels like an assassin. And this is something they've spoken about in the kind of lead up to the game as they've revealed more about the gameplay and that sort of thing. But she's the fastest assassin ever in the franchise.
Yeah.
And you can feel that when she's moving, but there's also more depth to parkour again now because you can't just climb anything like you could in the few previous games. So, and there's also parkour up.
They also give you a grappling hook with her, which is also really
good. Yeah. But that also means that when you're playing as Yasuke, there are areas that he cannot reach that
Yeah.
Naue can. So
Yep.
you have to kind of take that into consideration. Because there's part of this quest where you have to basically get to the top of a building. And I had an issue where in this section of the quest, I was actually playing as Yasuke. So I made it considerably harder for myself because I had to go in the building and just up loads of stairs,
Yep.
fighting people along the way. And it was like, but if I was Naue, I literally could have climbed up the outside and, used the grappling hook to get on the roof. Like, so that's kind of the first thing. That's the first area that I'd like to talk about is how, unlike Assassin's Creed Syndicate back in the day, where you had two playable characters, but they didn't actually play that different. To
Nah.
me, at least, based on the 4 hours that I got to play, like Naue and Yasuke actually play very differently.
Yes. And they also have what I noticed pretty early on is Naue is extremely squishy. She gets hit once, and all of a sudden you're like down half health, and you're like, crap. Yasuke gets hit once,
Yeah.
and he's just like, "What was that?" Whoops.
Yeah, it literally feels like it does nothing to him. And obviously, us, if you're not familiar with how Assassin's Creed has changed over the years, it's now an RPG, and the way the combat works is you still have these special abilities that you can activate based on like an adrenaline meter, but unlike the last few RPG games, there's also more depth to the moment-to-moment combat outside of activating those abilities, because you actually have to parry and dodge, and the way that kind of like Yasuke can block attacks but Naue can't. She can only deflect attacks.
Yep.
However, for some enemies, her deflect is actually more useful because it allows her to get behind them. And so it's kind of like this, it's this mix of things where you really do have to think about what might I encounter in this quest and who is best going to enable me to tackle it. Because, yes, as you mentioned, Naue dies considerably easier. Like, I actually died a few times as Naue during the play session.
Yeah.
And Yasuke is just a brute. Like, even his Spartan kick, I used that ability at one point, and this guy went flying, and I was like, "Oh my god!"
He really, Yasuke is that guy.
So yeah, I really like how differently they play, and I do think that could open up this game to having a lot more replayability than the previous games in the franchise.
Yeah.
Because I could see myself potentially doing one playthrough where I focus on one particular character, and then another playthrough where I kind of do the same stuff as the other character. But then I guess we should probably talk about how seasons work in this game, because I don't know if you had it, Scott, but the season actually changed on me midway through. And that did affect some things. Like, it was nice to see that it did actually affect some stuff in gameplay terms about what you can and can't do, because you see these big winds pick up and make loads of noise and stuff, or thunder going off, and it makes it harder for enemies to detect you in stealth. So it's not just this visual thing that, like, oh, we've got a new engine, we're just doing this to show it off. I was very impressed. Like, all in all, gameplay moment to moment, I was really, really impressed with what we got to play, and I'm interested to see how it feels in the earlier hours of the game,
Yeah.
where we're not quite as upgraded, and maybe we don't have certain things at our disposal yet, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, maybe we don't have the Spartan kick in the beginning.
But I guess the other element to talk about with gameplay is the actual weapons and tools that you have available to you, because Yasuke and Naue, really vary in that as well,
Yeah.
because Naue has your typical, what you might call assassin tools, right? So she has shuriken, which she can use to kind of distract enemies and get their attention, or
Or you
destroy
do what I
light
do.
sources.
You can explode the barrels with them and kill everyone nearby. How do you do stealth? Explode everything.
Yeah, stealth is leave no one alive to say that you were there.
I did it the first time by accident. I was gonna
That's-
hit a kunai. I was like aiming at the head. The guy walked away, and he ran like behind a barrel. Hit the barrel and blew up him and the guy next to him. Like, what just happened?
That is funny.
So then I focused on just doing that alone. I'm just like, I don't need to assassinate any of these guys. Just go boom, boom, boom.
So yeah, so you've got these different tools available to you. Throwing knife, shuriken, and there's a couple of other things as well. I think Naue also has smoke bombs, but
Yeah.
interestingly, for the first time in the franchise, certain enemies will not be stunned by these smoke bombs, and they will actually run away from the smoke. And I quite liked to see that AI behavior in action, because the AI does seem a lot smarter this time
Yes.
around
Yes.
than previous games. And don't get me wrong, I still had a few things with AI here and there, but obviously it's important to keep in mind that the build we were playing is still a work in progress, and
Yeah,
probably
we gotta see
in
that
earlier
in the
builds.
corner on our gameplay the entire time. This is a work in progress, so if there's any problems, just know this is a work in progress.
Yeah, and also we were playing it fully remotely, which probably
Yeah.
had some impact on our experience as well. But I would say that taking those two things into an account, I know that some people will want to hear about how this game is technically. I was actually quite impressed, considering it was a remote session. I know that you had a few more tech issues than I did, which we won't dwell on too much, but you know, I would imagine, based on, and I've had no confirmation on this yet, but I have asked the question, so by the time you're seeing this, we might have an actual answer about how old this build was that we played. But based on my experience, I'd imagine this is sort of like a 3 to 6 months old
Yeah, that's
build
what I
of the
imagine.
game.
That's what I would think too. And
Because they were originally going to preview this game back in the summer. These previews were in summer 2024 originally, and then they just delayed them with the delay of the game. So I would assume that, yeah, the build's probably around 6 months behind what you will actually play by the time the game comes out. So.
yeah. So I will admit that they did say in the beginning that these delays were a necessity for actually making the game run as well as it can. And and as I said, there was more tech issues than I had probably than I think other people, but also because I'm a tech oriented person, I probably caught them a lot more.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I definitely do think that they probably needed the extra time because I think my favorite thing that happened is when I tried to dodge and parry at the same time, because I had like a panic attack when like a samurai came up from behind me as Yasuke, and I didn't like realize it, because when you're Naue, you have to make sure that you can see everything. When you're Yasuke, you kind of just don't care. You just barrel through everything you see.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
like you don't care
And
if
I
there's,
mean,
like
you
7 enemies on
literally,
you.
to be fair, you literally can barrel through things as Yasuke. You can
Yeah.
run through doors. And
You
it's
can
crazy.
do a lot with Yasuke. Yasuke is basically just like, oh, there's an army, that's fine.
He is a tank. He is a tank of a man. It's you know, it's, and I focus on Naue a lot because to me, she is the character they are using to bring back a bigger focus on being an assassin and actually playing in stealth. And you know, we know she has a hidden blade, like using the hidden blade and all that sort of stuff, whereas Yasuke isn't too dissimilar from Eivor in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where he's just very big and heavy and quite slow, but he's a tank. Like
Yeah.
you can literally stand there and fight like 5 people on your own, and they're not gonna hurt you pretty much. Like,
Yeah, you don't have to worry, but yeah. So when I got surprised and I tried to dodge and parry at the same time, because I like even though there's like color indications, it like when like your brain just thinks, oh, they're attacking me, I have to do something, and so I wasn't looking at the color. I just saw the little animation. I'm like, oh crap, something's about to hit me, and so when I did that, instead of doing either of them, Yasuke turned into what I call the Eldritch Abomination, where he twisted his arms around themselves, and then his arms,
yeah,
his like legs twisted itself, and he just T
yeah,
posed in front of the enemy. And I was like, "What?"
yeah.
and it was
But
hilarious. But
but like
yeah,
I say again, I think it's important to mention that although weird, hilarious stuff may have happened like that in the preview, that is unlikely to be what you experience by
yeah,
the time you play.
that probably won't be in the main game.
So, what else would you like to talk about? Because I know we're going to talk a bit about kind of how we both played as different characters at potentially different times. So, I'm going to start by asking you this, and then maybe you can go on to that.
Okay.
Which of the two characters did you prefer playing as in the time that we had?
I actually kind of preferred to play as Yasuke, just because the whole mentality of just going straight through like the doors and going to everywhere I wanted to go. I just had to. I could just do whatever I wanted, kind of a deal. With now, you had to be a lot more smart about what you did.
You
You
had
had
to
to.
actually think,
You had to think about your
right?
strategies. You had to look around, make sure you could see all the enemies. With Yasuke, I didn't give a crap. If enemies showed up, I could basically just deflect,
Yeah.
parry, and then attack them, and then it's just like they're dead.
And
Back
and
to
you
the next
talked
section.
about those barrels earlier, and the
Yeah,
great thing is Yasuke can actually pick those up
yeah,
and move them. Like he can pick them up and throw them at people. He can
yeah.
move them. It's great. It's great.
So
And
I
he
like
and he
playing as
does have. I
Yasuke.
don't know if you know this, Scott, because based on the way you're describing that you played, it seems like maybe you didn't actually try and play in stealth. But Yasuke Yasuke does also have a bow, which allows him to keep stealth, but his arrows are somewhat limited.
Yeah.
However, so yeah, it's not like Yasuke is impossible to do stealth
No,
with,
you can do
but
stealth. He's
but
just
he's certainly
there's
not the
no point
stealth
to
focused.
it.
Yeah, because even his assassinations, it literally comes up and it's like brutal assassination,
Yeah,
and he'll like cut somebody's arms off.
goes over, cuts their arms off. He'll just like knock them out and cut their head off. It's just like, yeah, he doesn't give a crap about actual assassinations in the sense of like assassins like making them look like they're not actually dead. They're just like sleeping somewhere. No, if you saw this body in like in a closet, they weren't
You
asleep.
know,
They're
so
like
yeah,
half their limbs were off.
yeah,
He didn't give a
and
crap.
as Yasuke, I will say I really enjoyed, and I forget the official name of the weapon. Maybe you know it, Scott, but it was like the club type weapon.
Oh, the club. I didn't actually use much of the club. The weapons that I mostly
Oh,
used for him were his muskets, because they were like different like elements that you could switch like the balls in the musket.
yes, yeah,
And you could just
yeah.
like basically headshot a bunch of the enemies and just like whenever I saw a heavily armored enemy and I'm like, oh no, this could either be they're going to be very defensive, so I just pull out the musket,
Mhm.
shot their armor off. I'm like, okay, now I can kill you.
Yeah. So the club is quite similar to that actually, where if an enemy had armor, I would basically one hit them with the club and the armor would break.
There you go.
But yeah, what I quite liked as well, we talked about his kind of brutal assassinations, and also him and Naue also have these finishing moves where
Yes.
if you parry an enemy's attack at the right time and things like that, you can get them into a vulnerable state where they will glow like a yellow color, and that allows you to do more damage to them. And if you kill them during this period, you will actually do like a brutal finisher to them, and
Yes.
each weapon has different finishers, which I quite liked as well. So like
Yes.
it's you know, it is quite interesting. There is one thing I will say that I wish they had in this game that maybe they can think about adding in the future is like at the moment you can only equip two weapons at a time.
Yeah.
I wish there was just a weapon wheel for me to be like, okay, I want the club now, and now I want the. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like
yeah.
because if you want the bow for stealth, but then when you get into combat you want the musket,
Yeah.
you can technically equip both of those, but then you can't have a sword or a club. Like
Yeah.
it's a
You
bit of
want
a
to have a
weird
close hand and
situation.
long range weapon. You don't want to have to mess with
Yeah.
only having long range or close range, because then either you're like you have like archers trying to kill you, or
Yes. Yeah. Did you do so outside of the main quest, which we'll get onto more in a minute? Did you do any of the side stuff?
I didn't really do much of the side stuff. I saw that they were there, but I wasn't sure if we were supposed to do that or not. I could have asked the guy, but I also like didn't want to ask the guy stuff because he was very quiet in mine. But that
Yeah,
might have been just
my
because the
guy
game
was
was
pretty
so
quiet as well.
loud or something.
Yeah.
I basically have to stop, pause the game, and be like, "Okay, what'd you say to me?" Because there was like one time where I had to like go somewhere, but I couldn't see the icon because it's only on the top. Like you couldn't get it on the map, so I'd keep going to the map, going, "Where the crap am I supposed to go?" And then
Well,
really,
that's actually one thing I quite liked about this game. To be fair, you mentioning that is like the exploration is different because, and they've had it in the previous games where you can
yeah,
turn on the, I think they call it like the explorer mode. Where
yeah,
it was like the game wouldn't tell you exactly where to go, but it would give you hints.
yeah,
This forces that. So the game no longer tells you exactly where to go,
yeah.
but they've got a system in place to help you, which is the scouts, right? Did you use the
Yeah,
scouts?
I used the scouts for I think 2 of the quest lines, which I'm glad with the hints. It was nice because it basically give you like it's
A
this
rough
direction,
area.
this
Yeah.
area, and it's just like hopefully you know what west and east is. Otherwise, you're gonna be lost.
And also, to be fair, what I thought to myself as well is I imagine we were a good sort of 10 to 15 hours into the game,
Oh yeah,
right? And have if we had played 10 to 15 hours, we actually would have got used to that system. We would have got
yeah,
used to the map. We might have even known where certain things were without even having to use the scouts. So
yeah.
I actually quite like that system because it adds almost like a bit more of a dynamic feel to this Assassin's Creed game compared to the other games.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you were looking at a lot of the map, but we had like 4 different regions unlocked at this period, and we were only
Yeah.
able to go through the one region for this quest line.
Yeah, and they literally walled us off. So they
Yeah.
because I got to the edge of it at one point, and so they'd obviously done some magic in this version of the build, and they were like,
Yeah.
"No, you're not going over here."
You're not allowed to go past this area region. You have to basically hinder yourself to like the Hashirama area. And
Yes.
that was like
However, that one area felt quite big, mind.
there was a lot of stuff in that area, and it helped that there was like 3 different castles. They had like 3 different like churches and shrines
Yeah.
and stuff you could go to too. So it wasn't
Yes.
just like there's just like one building in one place. There were actual like a bunch
Yeah.
of different areas you could go to.
Yeah, and talking of a side content, because I did a little bit more of it than you did, by the sounds of it.
Yeah,
But
probably.
one thing one thing that I weirdly ended up wasting my time on, like I had infinite time to play this game, was going around like just finding wild animals and sneaking up on them, and then Naue will paint them,
Oh, okay.
and you can then use these paintings to decorate your hideout, which is something we know is in the game, but we didn't get to see. Which is basically like you build your own base, right? So there is like a base where we know that you will be able to recruit allies and they'll be able to help you on missions and stuff. And we did see some of that because one of the kind of skills we had available to us, I don't know if you used it, Scott, but I did a few times when I was playing as Yasuke, you could actually call an
Yes.
ally to assassinate someone or something.
Yes.
It was, which I thought was really cool. Yeah, I'm very very impressed with this game, and then I was impressed even further when I started to do the main quest that we had access to, because I have to talk about these cutscenes. Like, where has this new level of quality for these games come from, Scott? Because I'm not crazy, right? Like,
They look really good.
these were a different level of quality for
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed games.
Yeah. The eyes were not nearly as lifeless. You had a lot more emotions, and even like the more subtleties you could see from like the frowns and smiles and stuff from when they were talking. Or
Yes.
one of my favorite scenes. I don't know if you got to this part of it. Was when you have Yukite Naue talking with Kanbei Kuroda, and they're playing like a Go match, and as they're talking, they're like looking at the Go board, like doing like emotions, and then they're just like placing down the piece, and you can like actually see all the pieces fall down. Like it was just like they put a lot of emphasis on like
Hmm.
each and every single movement. And I was even, it's sad because I was even like talking about like, oh, he's putting the move here, he's doing the star point move, he's going to go do this because I love Go, so I'm just like
Yeah.
fascinated. Yes, they're
Yeah.
doing the ladder. Dude, take those stones. And
So,
my demoist was just like, I don't understand what he's talking about.
oh my god, that is funny. But yeah, it's like I was actually shocked, and don't get me wrong, we already spoke about how if you've seen any of the gameplay from this game is a beautiful looking video game. Like it's very good looking. The dynamic weather effects that can happen are really good looking as well, and they're actually happening in real time. They're not like baked in, which is some
That's
that's a
crazy.
big accomplishment, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see what some of the other regions in the game look like,
Yes.
because we know Japan is a very varied place in terms of how it can look, right? So it's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, I enjoyed this quest line, or what I got to play of it. You did finish it,
Yep.
and you also, being a fan of this period of time, are a bit more familiar with some of the people that show up. So, without going into full spoilers about what happens and stuff, we know that Assassin's Creed has a history of using real historical figures
Yes.
as part of their stories, right? So, what can you say to us about that?
So what I was able to at least glean from what we were able to experience from this quest line is it sounds like they're heavily leaning into the Tokugawa versus the Hideyoshi war line, which basically happens when Nobunaga dies, and they're just and basically you have one side of the factions going, well, you need to have royalty or like leader charisma blood to be the next like ruler of Japan, and then you have the other side who's a lot more of the people should fight for themselves, because a lot of people didn't like Hideyoshi because he came from a slave and a peasant background. And so a lot of people didn't really like him because of that. And then you have the Tokugawa clan who are basically like, no, we need to come with the power and the royalty that comes with the more superior bloodline, and we needed to use that. So it sounds like they're using that conflict as the push against like the Templars versus Assassins kind of battle that's going on, that goes out through all of history from all the Assassin's Creed games we can gather. If there's a conflict, you know that it's most likely a Templar versus Assassin problem going on.
And what I will say, to be fair, is if you've seen any of the kind of trailers and stuff, you will know that there is a trailer. There's a story trailer they released which alludes to the presence of the Templars,
Yeah.
and that's not something we really got to see. But there were elements of things we saw that
Yes.
kind of give me, yeah, I can kind of see where they're going with it. But yeah, I could talk about this game all day, Scott. Like, honestly, I'm watching the gameplay on my second monitor here, because we will have
Yes.
another video up on the channel with some gameplay, and I'm not gonna lie, this is the first time in quite a while where every single second of playing this game was a joy. Like I actually, it was so fun.
It was
It was
fun, yeah.
so fun.
The 4 hour period kind of just happened. Like I wasn't expecting it to be that quick.
And I'm obviously the bigger Assassin's Creed fan,
Yes.
and that's why I will be handling the review for us, which we should be able to do hopefully.
Yeah.
But with you being somewhat of a fan, but maybe not as much recently, do you think this preview left you wanting to play this game? Or
Yeah, I do think I would want to play Assassin's Creed Shadows. I do appreciate a lot of, well, just the history and all the figures that go into it. I love seeing how they portrayed Kanbei, Kuroda. I love seeing the differences of like Yukita and Naue and how they're dealing with that storyline, especially when you know the history of Yukita Naue and realize that there's a lot of interesting things they decided to do with him in this that kind of alludes to what actually happens in history, but it doesn't happen how it does in the game. And it's also funny with how sad you can kind of see him when he realizes that his son is going to have to supersede him as the clan leader.
yeah,
And that's because I'll give you just this note that in history, Yukite Naue became the clan leader when he was 7 years old. So he knows how it is to become the leader when you're just a
at
child.
a young age, yeah.
Yeah, and that wasn't uncommon in Japan. Like because of
Wow,
how big
okay.
this Warring States period was, clan leaders were always like at the head, at the front lines of things.
Yeah.
So they would die
And
constantly.
they were getting assassinated all the time, I would imagine.
Yes. So having child clan leaders wasn't exactly uncommon because of that. So there was a lot of interesting, just like if you knew history, you like know that yeah, he understands what's about to happen and he knows how hard that's gonna be in the future for his son.
Yes.
But
yeah.
also note that Hideie becomes a much better leader than his father was. But that's because his father was always known as kind of like the he basically did whatever was good enough for him to survive. He was all about making sure he survived. Even him joining Nobunaga at the time was because he knew that Nobunaga had a much better force than the current clan he was serving. So a lot of the thing he did was for like self-preservation and survival, which again, that's not a very uncommon thing when it comes to the clans, especially during this Warring States like period of the Sekigahara Edo period. So there's a lot of just there's a lot of things that happen in this period, and there's a lot of just like tragedy and grief and things that happen that just like there's just when you look at this like period of history, there's just a lot of crap that goes down. And war is just
I mean,
terrible.
because I'm a big fan of the time period from a setting perspective. Like I've always been a fan of samurais and that culture in particular, just because it's interesting to me for how different it is and what actually ended up kind of happening with the samurai and why they essentially disappear off the face of the earth. Yeah. It's, there's a lot of interesting things. I do find it interesting that in feudal Japan terms, there's lots of places they could have gone with this game. They could have set it much earlier. They could have, but no, it's like, no, we're actually going to set it here, this place where loads of bad stuff happens.
So yeah, I mean, this is probably like honestly the best place to put this type of Japanese setting because there is a lot of history here. There's a lot of things that happen, and having Yasuke as like the not really the focal point. The funny thing is, Naue is the focal point. They even tell you, they even like have like things that allude to this, but Yasuke's there, and those who know like Yasuke, his history is very mired in vagueness and mystery. We know he existed,
but no one knows for sure, right?
No one knows exactly what happened with him. We know like the only records we have of him that like he existed were people like 3 parties away from Nobunaga and seeing him as like this giant black guy, basically, and just going, "Who the crap is this?"
Someone
guy?
that they'd never seen before, right? And we know that he was a big person based on their opinion of him, at least.
Yeah,
like they viewed him as a much taller, much bigger person, and obviously he had a different skin color, which in this time period was probably quite shocking for them.
Yeah.
Because, travel around the world wasn't as easy back in those days.
No, it was not. Yeah, well, most of the other people in this time period are used to seeing other Japanese people. So whenever someone from a different region or land
or
shows up,
or maybe the occasional Spanish or
yeah, when they
British
do, like,
person.
merchants from other regions, but yeah, there's not a lot of other regions that would interact with Japan, especially during this time period when things were on fire, basically. So
Yes. Yeah, and yeah, I'm excited to explore more of it. I genuinely felt like in the 4 hours we had, I was only able to scratch the surface of the game, because if I go back to side content for a minute, I was exploring with Naue, and there was a person that I found, and I was like, oh, I can't interact with them. But then she made a comment and she was like, oh, maybe this is one of those people, like certain type of people that Yasuke is looking for, right? So it seems like even within the side content, there's going to be certain things that only Naue can do and certain things that you have to be playing as Yasuke to do.
yeah,
But I think that's quite clever because it's going to stop people from going, I want to play as this person and this is the only person I'm going to play as. And even in the gameplay we did get to play, let's talk about the quest a bit more, because the way it works is you choose who you want to play as, but at different points during the quest, you do have the option to sort of continue the quest as somebody else.
yeah. So yeah, during the quest lines, they'll have cinematics, and then usually during some of the cinematics, you'll have the character you were. And then off screen, you'll see the other character. If you're now a Yasuke, will show up and they'll be like, "Hey, what happened?" And then you'll give a very brief overview of what happened, and then they'll basically discuss what's going to happen next in the quest line. And then at that point, it'll give you a little prompt of, do you want to continue the quest as Naue or do you want to continue the quest as Yasuke? Once they basically have talked about what they're going to do.
Yes, yeah, and there was one choice where I'll vaguely speak about what's happening to avoid spoilers for people, but you are going back to a castle because you're aware of something that is going to happen, of a plan that is taking place.
Yep.
And when you get there, it's kind of like you'll be playing as one person, they'll let you in, but then Naue and Yasuke are there and they're talking, and Yasuke's like, oh, I'm going to go and do this, and Naue's like, I can do this, and then you make the choice of which one you want to be in. In that moment, I chose Naue, and I was actually taking out these other shinobi which were hiding around the building that we had to get into. So and this is purely speculation on my part, but I think it's fun. That made me think, we know that there's been rumors of potentially a co-op mode coming later to this game. And when I saw that, it made me think, have they almost designed it with that in mind? Because if Yasuke's gone off and done something else, and if I would have chose Yasuke and I actually would have done something else, is that effectively what's happening here? And then if they do this co-op mode, there could be quite a nice opportunity for them to be like, oh, one of you plays one and one of you plays the other, and you see different parts of it, because there was another section where I chose Yasuke and I ended up in a mini boss fight that I wasn't expecting to have. And it was a mini boss fight, and then next minute I just see Naue killing other shinobi over in the it was so there's lots of interesting stuff they can do. I like that when you choose, it seems like on these bigger quest lines, when you choose to play as somebody, you're not necessarily stuck into that choice for the entire quest.
Yep.
Because there will be certain times where one character is going to suit you more than the other. right? Like,
Yeah.
for example, for pretty much every boss fight we encountered here, I tried to use Yasuke. Like, if I had a sense that a boss fight was
Yeah.
coming up, I wanted to be Yasuke because in combat, he is the more capable.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that Naue isn't capable, but Naue can get overrun very, very easily,
Yes.
and she also gets hurt more easily.
Yeah,
So
one hit
it's,
against Naue means a whole lot more than one hit against Yasuke.
yes, yeah, definitely. So, I'm really interested to see how people will actually play this game. We mentioned earlier about how the parkour is actually very different with both of them as well, but something I didn't mention is even riding a horse is different with both of these characters.
Yes.
Like, Naue is much faster on the horse. She can
Yes.
actually change her stance to be able to like
Jump off it, which is
like
awesome.
do things. Yeah, so it's really cool. And then yeah, Yasuke is just like Yasuke is essentially the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah.
you know.
He is the samurai in every sense of the word. He doesn't do this flashy acrobatic stack. He takes a sword and he attacks you with it.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm really, really interested to see more. I think that I said this to you, Scott, but this preview left me immediately wanting to play more of the game. And for a preview, I think that's the best you can really hope for.
Yes.
Because it also left me with lots of stuff still to discover, right? Like, we haven't seen the hideout. We know that those are in the game. We know that allies are in the game, but we're not sure of how they exactly function. But we got to see the core gameplay, the kind of moving around the environment, all the different things you can do. Like I mentioned earlier about drawing the animals and stuff, but there are other little kind of activities out in the world that you can do. And I think that people are going to lose a lot of time to this video game, but in a good way for once. So, I didn't, at least based on the one area that we got to play in, it felt like there was a lot of stuff, but it didn't feel like an overwhelming amount
Yeah.
of content. It
Yeah.
it felt like the amount of content where if we had had an extra 2 hours, we probably could have cleared that entire area.
Probably, actually. I mean, I did most of the I did the full main quest line, but I skipped a lot of the side quests. But at the same time, there wasn't a whole lot of side quests.
No,
There's
it,
maybe
it
like
kind
three
of
or four
feels
of
like
them that shows up.
yeah. I, I will say there was part of the main quest where and this was one of the few problems I had, and this is kind of where I'll end what I want to say, because people will probably think, oh, you're just being really positive. But there was one problem I had, and basically I had to go and find this guy that was in a gambling den. And
Yes.
he's a funny character, but I was trying to find him, and the marker on the map was telling me that he was in a certain place. And then when I was moving away from there, it was like, oh, I'm getting further away from him, right? And it didn't have a down arrow or up arrow to say like he's above me or below me. When I was stood on top of him, like when I was stood on top of where he was, the icon would disappear. So I had no idea of where he actually was. And then the next minute, I go into the base that's like 50 yards to the right of me, find some stairs, go down below ground, and there's a gambling den underground. So I was on top of him. I was just literally on top of him.
Just
And
on top
so,
of it.
so there is still that weird thing where some of the markers will not lead you exactly to where you're meant to be. And
Yeah.
you will have to kind of look around, and they won't always be 100% accurate to where you are actually supposed to be. So you need to also pay attention to the clues on the side and the information the game gives you. Because
The thing that I
can be a
had to do
problem.
for that, because I had a similar issue with that quest line, is they have a thing called the Pathfinder
Yes.
thing. And so when you hold a certain directional button, it will then it'll give you the actual, like, this is where you need to go pathfinding. So it'll give you like a little line that you have to follow. And that's how I found him. But I also was running away very fast because I got in the middle of like a fight between two samurai.
That's funny. That is funny. But
Which
yeah,
is
no,
funny
I
because
love.
once I talked to the guy, the samurai left. So like, what the heck?
And then I think there's another few things that are important to mention. So you do still have your typical viewpoints in this game,
Yes.
but they don't have quite what you would expect. Like the traditional Assassin's Creed camera pan with the music and everything isn't quite there. Like they still do something with it, but it's not quite the same. And then
Not the
even when you
iconic thing.
and then even when you go up these towers, it doesn't just litter your map with icons, which I actually really like. I think that's the right decision because you'll go up these towers and you have to hold the observe button, which is something you can do when you're in normal gameplay anyway. And
Yep.
you basically actually look around as the character and you can then mark different icons and undiscovered locations as to where you'd like to go. But I guess we should talk about the fact that Eagle Vision is back in the game in its more traditional way now. You no longer have a bird that flies above you and marks everyone. It's not an actual eagle, it's Eagle Vision in the way that we know and love, but only Naue has access to Eagle Vision.
Yeah.
Right? So Naue has Eagle Vision. Yasuke, however, can still use the observe mechanic, which is basically a way of zooming in onto enemies and marking them.
Yep.
Naue can also do this, but it means that you have to have line of sight on the enemy to be able to mark them.
Yeah.
Once they're marked, you will then, you'll know roughly where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so there are things like I'm keen to let people know who are fans of the older Assassin's Creed games and maybe not the newer kind of RPG style ones. This is doing a lot to kind of return to something closer to those older games, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think Naue is kind of their bridge to try to make it a lot more like the older Assassin's Creed games. Because I mean, there are those that are fans of like Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, where it is more RPG, more combat
Yeah.
focused, and a lot less on the stealth mechanic focus.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like assassinations. Because that's one thing we actually didn't talk much about. But assassinations in this game exist. They still function in a way where certain characters, at least by default, certain enemy types will not be killed in one
Yeah.
hit by an assassination. They will take damage. However, if you want to play it more like an old school Assassin's Creed as just a stealth game, there is an option in the menu to turn on one hit assassinations on all enemies.
Yep.
So you can effectively make it the older games even more if you want to.
There is a lot of choice.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I didn't encounter, although I know they exist. I know that there are enemies that can also like flat out deny your assassinations, and they will literally just like throw you.
You'll try to assassinate them, and they'll get hurt. They'll just like grab your arm and like throw you.
Yeah.
What'd you just do to me, bro?
But yeah, like all in all, I was very, very impressed by pretty much every aspect of this game. And yes, there are a few problems, but at this point in time, I'm not going to be too hard on the game for it because some of those problems were probably down to the circumstances in which we were playing, being remote.
And it's still an earlier build of the game.
Yes. And actually, in terms of a preview, this was one of the kind of better versions of a preview build of a game that I've played. It was fairly solid. Even Scott, with his crazy issue that he had at one point, I'm sure would say that it was fairly solid for
It
a
was fairly
preview build.
solid. I spent just 3 minutes laughing my head off though at the Eldritch abomination that happened. The demo's
But
guy's
yes,
like, "I never seen this happen." I'm like, "I don't care. This is hilarious."
But yeah, and then obviously, if you go out and kind of see gameplay on our YouTube as well, which we will have, we're going to have another video which is probably about 10 minutes where we'll talk more in detail about certain things because we're going to have a written version of the preview that we convert to a video basically, and me and Scott will work on that together. I'll probably tackle it from the perspective of I am the Assassin's Creed fan, and Scott can tackle it from I'm the fan of this time period and all that sort of stuff.
I liked it when Assassin's Creed was good. No,
But yeah, I think between us we should have some good coverage. We have quite a lot of gameplay that we can edit together and show you different things. So yeah, I now have the job of scanning through all of our gameplay and finding the cool things to show you. But yeah, I would say that, like I said, I'd summarize as saying this is the most fun I've had with Assassin's Creed probably since Assassin's Creed Origins, because Valhalla was just far too big, in my opinion. I struggled with Valhalla because of how big it was and because of how far away it moved from being focused on being an actual Assassin's Creed game.
Yeah.
And then Odyssey, I think, was an amazing game in its own right, but didn't need to be an Assassin's Creed game.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my issue with that one. Whereas Origins, I think, was the one game so far that kind of got the balance between old Assassin's Creed and RPG Assassin's Creed right, because it kind of did both things, and this seems to take lessons from basically the entire franchise and is trying to make, like, when they delayed this game and they said they're trying to make the opus of this franchise, it genuinely feels like that is what they are trying to make. They're trying to make a game that will satisfy both parts of the audience without diluting too much of either side of the experience.
Yeah.
Because if you like the RPG stuff, you're probably going to focus more on playing as Yasuke and going in and knocking people's heads off and that kind of thing. Whereas if you like your stealth action stuff, Naue is probably more your speed, I'd say. But, you know, you can decide that by looking at our gameplay preview down below. We'll probably link it to make sure you can get straight to it. Scott, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
So my final thoughts is I'm excited for Assassin's Creed Shadows. I think the preview that we played was pretty solid. It definitely did seem like they needed that extra few months of working on the game. And this preview build not only just showed that they're trying to do their best to make it a functional game that works, but also one that will be one that people want to play. I love this historical period, so I might be a little biased in that sense. So I'm going to be super excited to see how they deal with more of the characters in that period. I'm a big fan of like Hideyoshi, and being able to actually see him and talk with him as Yasuke or Naue is going to be fun to notice.
Yes.
I do think that this game will be pretty solid. I don't know if it will be my favorite Assassin's Creed, which I would have to think about that, but I do think that it has probably near the top echelon of Assassin's Creeds if it's this quality.
Yeah, based on the 4 hours we played, I'd agree with that. Like, I can see this being a top 3 in the franchise based on the 4 hours we played. And look, the game could fall apart in the other 100 hours, but you know, we can only base it on what we've played so far. I'm very, very excited to play more of it. Scott, I'm going to end it by asking you this question, because we know that there's a lot of kind of disenfranchised Assassin's Creed players over the years, and many people have stopped playing the games. Based on what we played, do you think that this is the one to jump back into?
Yeah, I would think this is one you'd want to get if you are an Assassin's Creed fan from the old Ezio days, like myself. I think this is one you want to give a crack to. You will notice Naue does have a lot of utility in her kit, and I do think that she plays extremely well. And I do like that there is a lot more detail in the castles and the fortresses you can go on for these assassinations. The grappling hook gives you a lot of utility in terms of making your own kind of perches, and there's a lot you can basically deal with in the assassin's mindset. So I think this is one for the older fans to get back into if you do miss like the Ezio run.
Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure. And when we can come back and tell you more things, we definitely will, because there is more things we could have said about this game. Like,
Yeah.
even on the 4 hours that we've played, there was so much to say, and like we said earlier, we played the prologue, but we're not allowed to tell you anything about that yet.
No, we are not.
So when we can talk about that, we definitely will at some point. But yeah, until then, we will see you next time. This has been the Spectator Mode podcast. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more good content from the Outerhaven. And of course, you can head to theouterhaven.net for all of our written content as well, because Scott decides to do like 1,000,000 reviews a year, and I'm sure he's going to have 1,000,001 reviews this year. So,
Oh, jeez. I just say yes to everything and I play everything. It's easy.
but yes, we will see you next time. Goodbye.
See ya.